Following, we will send you interesting information has just been updated. Please follow along. Former Minister of Social Policy of Ukraine, Andriy told Pryamiy TV channel that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky are prepared to accept the terms of surrender from the President Biden-Trump. The Ukrainian leadership has agreed that we will withdraw, even though they say the opposite. The former minister noted that the proposed conditions for Kyiv to surrender include renunciation of territorial claims, give up your NATO membership, Ukrainian military solution, Mr. Reva. He stressed that the only negotiations are ongoing with Washington. It's about ensuring Mr. Zelensky's personal security and those close to him. Previously, Alexander Dubinsky, a member of the Ukrainian parliament, it was predicted that Zelensky would flee to South Africa. Meanwhile, the New York Times recently reported Ukrainian forces has withdrawn almost entirely from the Russian quacks. After 7 months of fighting, a Ukrainian soldier painfully admitted it all ended at quacks. Back to the 8th of June 2024. Ukrainian armed forces. It has surprised both Russian and Western analysts as we march lightning fast across the border. Intrusion into more than 800 square kilometers of the Hoof area of Russia. The attack took the Russian military by surprise, but Ukrainian territory doesn't have much strategic significance. Antigua comments. If the Ukraine attack achieve any benefit immediately, it's a little confusing, as well as surprise for the Russian government. And it's got some short-term propaganda benefits in the country as well as in the West. It also gives you a mental boost. Not much for the military and the Ukraine is used to dismal news from the front lines. After 7 defeats of the counterattack in the summer of 2023, but like in so many battles in this war, as well as many battles in Russian and Soviet history, the country's armed forces have always been very good at changing circumstances. Russian army. They then quickly launched an effective counterattack to knock Ukrainian forces out of the water. It's clearly the last stage of the Kursk campaign. It is not easy for Ukraine. Just a few days ago, Russian President Vladimir Putin, implying that the Ukrainian army are now completely isolated in Kursk. He also hinted that escape was becoming increasingly impossible. Although President Volodymyr Zelensky, they claim that Putin is lying. The Ukrainian army firmly declared units in the area of Kuwait not under siege. In an interview with the BBC, a Ukrainian soldier fighting here, I honestly admit, it all ended in Kuwait. Ukrainian soldiers reveal more. Logistics is no longer effective. The delivery includes weapons and ammunition. Food and water are no longer viable. Obviously, Ukraine has not achieved any of the above objectives, but pay a terrible price. Despite the incredible success of the invasion of Ukraine's quacks, was quickly stopped by the Russian armed forces. Instead of diverting Russian troops and weapons from the Donbas, Ukraine's invasion of the Kursk had the opposite effect. The best trained and equipped soldiers of the Ukrainian armed forces had to divert from the Donbas front. They were sent to Kursk to occupy territory, or simply keep some territory they cannot control indefinitely, while Ukrainian forces are tied up in Kursk, gradually pushed back with 7 increasingly large and advanced military equipment. Russian forces quickly took advantage of this. The Russians exploited Ukraine's weak defenses in the Donbas and further west. They've stepped up attacks, further weakening of Ukraine's defense system along the front, and seized more territory in the Donbas. It's really about getting trained and best equipped to Kursk. In the end, they couldn't bring Ukraine anything apart from the terrible price in terms of both life and equipment. Despite the initial surprise and now confusion, President Putin can enjoy the feeling. Liberated Russian territory from Ukraine. It has been described as an existential threat to Russia before and from the beginning of the war. Trump has raised the idea that the United States would control nuclear plants. This plan could face many logistical challenges and the risk of conflict. President Donald Trump recently said, during the negotiations in Saudi Arabia, U.S. delegation holds talks with Russia and Ukraine on territorial issues, boundaries as well as nuclear power plants. U.S. President Donald Trump said right now, we're discussing the territorial issue. We're talking about boundaries, ownership of Ukrainian nuclear power plant. The White House shared more. Some people say the United States should have nuclear power plants because we have expertise. However, he did not specify which Ukrainian nuclear power plant is it. President Volodymyr Zelensky previously said he discussed it with Mr. Trump about the possibility of U.S. assistance in restoring the largest nuclear facility in Europe. The plant was briefly controlled by Russia after Moscow launched a special military operation in Ukraine. In a phone call on May 19, Trump has suggested to the Ukrainian leader America can be very helpful in the operation of nuclear power plants with expertise and tools available. In addition, Mr. Trump said he's hoping for a distribution deal. Revenues from mineral deals in Ukraine will be signed soon. Trump's comments were made not long ago after the US and Russian delegations concluded 12 hours in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. The meeting came just a day after the US-Ukraine talks. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov know the problem of the Black Sea Initiative and everything related to innovation and innovation. It's all on the agenda. Peskov added, Russian and American delegation. I have no intention of signing any documents after the meeting. Parallel to that, United 24 News Channel just said at a press conference on March 24, local time. Spokesperson for the U.S. State Department, Mrs. Tammy Bruce, claims that the negotiations ending the Ukrainian conflict, significant progress has been bringing both parties to the shore of an agreement. Mrs. Bruce said this was remarkable. We've never been that close. We're one step away from a full ceasefire. According to U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, President Donald Trump's administration are doing all they can to end the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. We also condemn the countries that hinder this effort. Rubio said that the conflict in Ukraine, it needs to end through diplomacy. It's not a military operation. President Trump is the only leader in the world who Moscow and Kiev at the negotiating table. According to the U.S. Secretary of State, efforts have been. It has faced resistance from some foreign governments. It does not specify any country. Rubio added, President Trump is getting close to a peace deal, despite obstacles from other countries. Some people have a different view than about how to solve conflict. Foreign Minister Rubio's comments comes before the talks between the U.S. and Russia in the Arab region ends. This time the conversation is about maritime the Black Sea and the prospect of reviving the Five-Cup Agreement. Joint statement is expected to be made in 25/3 hour local. After a phone call between the Russian President Putin and his US counterpart last week, Moscow and the Kiev have reached a ceasefire agreement, in part committed to stopping the attacks to target each other's energy infrastructure for 30 days. The Russian Defense Ministry reported Ukraine has carried out many attacks into Russian energy facilities. The Kremlin spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, asserts that even though Kiev violated the agreement, continues to maintain the energy ceasefire. In an interview last weekend, Petrov also voiced criticism. The EU believes that instead of promoting peace and address the root causes of the conflict, the European countries, we are discussing the possibility of deploying NATO forces. Tensions between Washington and European NATO members continue to increase since President Trump took office in January 2025. The new U.S. administration are pushing for a quick solution to the conflict. Ukraine at the same time planned transfer of security responsibility after the ceasefire goes into effect. At a summit in London earlier this month, France and Britain have signalled their readiness to deploy Western peacekeeping mission to Ukraine after the ceasefire is in place. However, Moscow firmly rejected this proposal. He said that the NATO military presence on the territory of Ukraine, no matter what, it doesn't change the nature of the problem. Former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev even warned that this move could spark for a direct confrontation between NATO and Moscow. The Russian Defense Ministry has accused Ukraine drones to attack the pumping station Kropotkinskaya in the Krasnodar region of Russia. According to this, the drone was destroyed by the air defense units. Russia shot down and crashed about 7 kilometers from the pump station railway Kapkazskaya. This is part of the Caspian Pipeline Consortium. The Russian Defense Ministry announced Ukraine defied a limited ceasefire to attack Russia. The Russian Defense Ministry said it's been the target of drones, referring to a previous attack in mid-February. Russia in February accused Ukraine of attack on the largest oil pumping station on the pipeline on Russian territory is a provocation. Clearly, Mr. Dmitry Medvedev, Russian Security Council Vice President, warns a blow to an oil company. This can cause the oil pump to stop. They upset the market balance, causing oil prices to skyrocket and causing direct damage. At that time, former President of Russia Medvedev also said that the attack on a pipeline partly owned by American companies. That's not good for President Donald Trump. The government has sought to lower oil prices. Moscow description. The latest attack was a ceasefire violation, partly mediated by the US. Both Moscow and Kiev are committed to work into each other's energy infrastructure. The ministry said the Kiev government continues to prepare and carry out attacks on energy infrastructure. This includes internationally owned properties in Russia. Comment on the attack on Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova said, "This is the typical behavior of Kiev, especially before international events like this week's Russian-American talks in Saudi Arabia." She thought that Ukraine continues to attack Russia's civilian infrastructure. The Kiev does not want peace. Zakharova says that every time before any meeting, even during visits to Moscow of foreign delegations, the Kiev government has committed acts of terrorism, attacks on civilian infrastructure, civilian targets of extremist acts. They don't need peace, they've said this many times. Last week the Russian military accused Kiev they also carried out an attack by a suicide drone and an oil transfer station in the Krasnodar area. A few days later Moscow reported Ukrainian forces have destroyed a border gas measuring station in the Huf region of Russia, while the Kiev blames Russia for this. According to the Russian military, Ukraine blew up the facility during its retreat after months of intrusion into Kursk. Although the Russian Defense Ministry they have criticized Ukraine's provocative actions, but the Kremlin. He also announced his intention to maintain a partial ceasefire. However, the Russian Foreign Ministry warned Moscow may withdraw from the agreement if Kiev continues to violate. The Russian Defense Ministry recently reported Air Defense Forces successfully repelled the government's attack. The attack involved unmanned aerial vehicles aimed at Globovsky condensate gas field on the Khan's Baukwile in Crom, where it's used to deliver gas to people and the economy of the Russian peninsula. Previously it also carried out drone strikes into the gas distribution station and in the burning Bongo region of Russia. Damage to the technological equipment of this facility. Russian Ministry of Defense for more information. Attacks on energy facilities in Russia continue with a series launch missile system. Hima's statement give war. Ukraine's attack on its energy infrastructure, including the international infrastructure on Russian territory, to prove that Kiev is unable to negotiate. Meanwhile, Ukrainian Defense Minister Rustem Umerov stressed President Volodymyr Zelensky is determined to achieve peace, fair and long-lasting. On the last phone call, Russian and US leaders discussed 30-day ceasefire. Putin looked at the initiative in agreement, but mentioned some major obstacles. One of the obstacles involves establishing a monitoring mechanism in Ukraine. During the ceasefire, the Ukrainian army then attack on all depots in the Krasnodar region of Russia. He blew up a gas station near Susa in Kuwait. Moscow accuses Ukraine of violating energy ceasefire and warned them they had the right to retaliate. Trump's special envoy to the Middle East, Steve Walt, told Fox News that he remained optimistic about the meeting with the Russians. Walt insisted, "I think you'll see some real progress in Saudi Arabia. It impacts the Black Sea ceasefire for ships, RAFTA countries, while the US-Russia-Ukraine indirectly talks in Saudi Arabia. Military operations continue on the front lines, and the two sides accuse each other attacked with drones and missiles." The news agency specifically TASS quoted information from the Russian Defense Ministry. Forces have attacked the country's military airports, the ammunition depot, and UAV drone launch points in the special warfare zone. According to the Russian Defense Tactical Ministry, combat aircraft, UAVs attack missile and artillery units. Russia has attacked military airport infrastructure, ammunition depots, assembly workshops, and UAV assembly as well points, as where to launch the UAV. Added that the attacks were carried out in 142 regions across Ukraine. He also quoted a military expert named Andriy Morocco. The Ukrainian forces began to use less of the 6-man tactical missile system made in USA. This shows the number of missiles attacks in the hands of Ukrainian forces are fading away. Moroccan experts say Ukrainian forces, in fact, there are not many ATACMS missiles. But you don't think they run out of these missiles. For the Kiev government army, they still use US-made missiles to attack the Bangla region of Russia. The AP previously cited sources from the US presidential administration revealed Ukraine no longer has missiles. According to AP, the United States has provided less than 40 missiles of this
Ukrainian
type to the accuse Russia of missile attack on Sumy city. 65 people were injured. The Russian Defense Ministry recently confirmed 25 crashed during a training flight. The pilot got out in time, and it's not life-threatening. According to this kit, the training planes don't carry weapons. Su-25 fell into an empty area. There was no damage on the ground. An investigative team of the Russian Aerospace Forces flew to the scene of the accident to investigate the incident. This is the second military plane crash Russia this month. Last week, Anadolu news agency. According to information from the Russian Defense Ministry, during the training flight as planned, Mi-28 helicopter crashed in the air. Leningrad plane crashed in an unpopulated area. The entire crew was killed. According to the Russian Defense Ministry, when the helicopter did not carry any weapons, the Russian Air Force has sent a committee where the accident occurred to investigate the incident. Previously, the Russian Air Force lost 6 lash because many incidents are not combat-related since 2009 in the context of General Christopher Cavoli, head of the U.S. European Command, told U.S. lawmakers that by April 2000 there were not 220. Russia lost about 10% of its fleet since the war in Ukraine. Start 2020 to the Department of Defense said in a statement by Russian state news agencies TASS and Interfax quotes that Su-25 crashed in Russia's Bristol Sky-Cry region due to technical problems, where the public was able to launch out and be rescued by the search and rescue was no threat to life or the pilot's health. Both Russia and Ukraine, they lost a large number of planes in the war. In the open-source defense intelligence analysis of the Netherlands, verified visually, 120 Russian planes were destroyed. 17 aircraft were damaged since the beginning of the conflict in Ukraine by 2022. ORIC also visually confirmed that 100 Ukrainian planes destroyed since the war began. 4 of them were damaged and 1 was seized. The Ukrainian military said in a recent update that Moscow has lost 370 planes since the war began. General Staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces data on the loss of 7 Russian troops and equipment as part of a daily update on the war. Russia lost 1,280 troops in a single day, bringing the total to 904,760. Like Ukraine, Moscow rarely discloses information about the number of casualties this country suffered in the war. Independent online newspaper Euromaidan Press in Ukraine recently reported the conflict in Ukraine are witnessing a remarkable phenomenon. It's a huge increase in the number of international volunteers to create an unprecedented wave of international volunteers in the country's defense efforts. Motivation for the wave support is a significant change in American foreign policy under the Trump administration. In recent weeks, the Trump administration has made controversial adjustments on Ukraine. These measures include the suspension of military aid, reduce intelligence sharing, coupled with a lack of long-term commitment to support. President Trump are considering major adjustments in their commitment to NATO. It may even refuse to protect member states. Does not meet the defense spending threshold. Face this situation, thousands of people from many different countries decided to act on his own, volunteer to Ukraine to support the Kyiv for the ongoing battle with Moscow. It is worth noting after the meeting between the President and President Zelensky in the Oval Office at the end of last month, units of the Ukrainian army received a large number of applications from international volunteers, according to an international military who shared the information on condition of anonymity. The rules of the unit. Thousands of participating units through recruitment channels. International Cause of Ukraine. It was established soon after the conflict broke out. It's one of the most prominent to receive foreign fighters. This unit has been involved in many important activities, including the 2020 to Kharkov counterattack, the Battle of North Mo, the fighting in Chorchupia, and protect the Kramina forest. A Job Brigade, one of the most famous units of Ukraine, also get foreigners in your fifth row. It was originally a volunteer militia. The Ajop Brigade used international volunteers too, with many people directly engaged in combat in strategic locations. Recently, the unit has announced plans to form an international battalion. Another notable unit is the BA Independent Attack Brigade, which has been deployed in the most dangerous areas of the front line. The brigade is currently forming to international battalions. There's a battalion dedicated to soldiers from Western-speaking countries, Spain and Portugal. In addition to direct combat
foreign
roles,
volunteers have also made significant
contributions
through many
too.
other roles. Veterans from NATO countries have been training soldiers Ukraine by Western military standards and instructions for the use of advanced weapons. Many volunteers involved in the logistics and distribution of humanitarian
ensure
and
essential
military supplies reach the front lines. Medical professionals from abroad providing services, treating both wounded and civilians. FP notes direct support from volunteers. It's becoming especially important for the US policy context. Change the contributions of volunteers not only fill the gap in aid, but also strengthen the resilience of Ukraine, both physically and mentally. As the war with Russia enters its fourth year, the participation of this volunteer is providing essential support to Ukraine's defense efforts. The Chinese Foreign Ministry denied the information. That officials are discussing sending force of preservation to Ukraine after the conflict is over. Reva, a Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman, in a press conference by George Jacob, it also refers to the "We're looking to continue to work with the international community peace talks and facilitate a ceasefire as well as ending conflict." Before that, the Grand Amtstech of Germany, citing sources, said China is assessing its potential role in the mission of preservation in Ukraine with the European Union when the conflict ended. Before that, in an online meeting hosted by British Prime Minister with about 25 European and allied leaders, March 16th, President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky, he also called on allies to take a clear stand about security guarantees, including the ability to deploy foreign military on the territory of Ukraine with the support of the United States. Reply to the Prime Minister confirmed a voluntary coalition that will help defend Ukraine on the sea and the ground in the event of a peace agreement with Russia. However, this is an important issue that has not been approved by the Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Alexander Grosko. The observer force. It must be an unarmed force, a civilian mission. Follow up on every aspect of the peace agreement or the mechanisms that ensure. French President Emmanuel Macron said that the deployment of peacekeepers in Ukraine, it's a matter for Ukraine to decide, not Russia. A peacekeeping mission led by Britain and France to ensure the security of Ukraine in case of a ceasefire by deploying foreign troops on the ground as well as providing air and sea support. The details of this mission are still unclear because of the discussions in the voluntary alliance. It's still happening. The discussion took place in the context of the US president pushing for a ceasefire in Ukraine. At the same time, we reject the possibility led by Europe that will probably only provide logistical support. In recent years, China is Russia's leading economic partner. Cooperation with China and other partners. It helped Russia stand up over 28,000 sanctions from the West. Moscow many times to drop the idea of having a European army or NATO of consequences if this scenario happens. Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov warning the presence of NATO troops under any flag and in any capacity on the territory of Ukraine. They are a threat to Russia. According to Mr. Moskova, I will not accept this under any circumstances. According to Novinky News, number of soldiers leaving the army. The Czech Republic has grown 40% annually since 2022. Minister of Defense Jana Senova declared. The Czech Republic is losing more and more experienced soldiers they could be deployed to Ukraine. Senova argues that for some people, the reason for leaving is because of the war in Ukraine. She added that some of the soldiers were disturbed by the speculation about military missions in the future, due to the social atmosphere when many observers have threatened mobilization for many soldiers will be sent to Ukraine. For some people, that's why they took off their uniforms. According to Novinky News, number of soldiers leaving the Lightning Army has increased by 40% since annually. The Ukraine conflict escalated. In 2022, 2020, for 1,370 professional soldiers leave the military. That number is 1,200 in 2000, not 1,337 the year before. By 2020, the number of military personnel leaving the military usually ranges from 8,001,000 per year. Minister Senova confirmed. Of her speeches, based on informal conversations with the military. I've been talking to the military for years, in my personal life. I know that some soldiers actually thought, and I'm thinking this way. She said the minister also admitted that it's difficult to determine the exact reason for leaving, because the military often doesn't disclose why. Meanwhile, leaders and politicians are considering the possibility of bringing the peacekeeping force in Ukraine after the parties to the Russian-Ukrainian conflict to reach a formal peace agreement. Speaking to the press on April 2nd, President Pavlov said, "Sex was part of the voluntary alliance. This includes a group of countries that are discussing the creation of a peacekeeping force in Ukraine." He also noted that after a peace agreement is signed, the Sex army should be part of this alliance. "I agree with the Czech leader, Minister of the Interior Skru Rokuzen, given that Czechs should participate in general peacekeeping of European countries and other allies. The Czech Republic cannot rely on Polish law or any other country to ensure security and resolve the separation of this country. So by participating in the security forces, keeping peace in Ukraine, boss, they are also working for their own interests and security while leading the ANO opposition movement." Andriy Bobus objected to the plan. Czech Republic joins peace force in Ukraine. At the same time, he expressed doubts about the possibility to participate and complete such a task. At the time, a military source was quoted. "You said European countries. There are plans to deploy more than 10,000 soldiers keeping the peace in Ukraine. More than 35 countries have agreed to supply weapons, technical and intelligence support supplies for the European mission." Potential. Before the move on, Russian Security Council Vice President Dmitry Medvedev warned the deployment of European forces to Ukraine. This will lead to a full-scale conflict between Russia and this alliance. The president's job. Donald Trump changes U.S. foreign policy more friendly to Russia, suspend Ukrainian military aid. They even threaten traditional allies. It's causing Europe to rethink of dependence on American weapons systems. The United States supplies nearly 2/3 of European arms in recent years. Many systems depend on American workers in maintenance and operation. This makes the member states. The EU is worried about what could happen if Washington stops supporting US-made weapon systems that NATO allies in Europe current use. Some European countries have begun to reconsider equipment purchased from the US to assess the risk of harm in a potential conflict with Russia if Washington cuts off support. More and more countries are calling for the future of American weapons and focus on the local industry, although many people admit that there's no quick fix after 10 years. Depends on Washington. Last week it was announced that Boeing would produce the F-7 sixth-generation fighter jet. Trump says the version sold to allies. It may not be fully functional, like the American version, because one day, maybe they're no longer our allies. Several countries have or are planning to buy F-35 aircraft from the United States. They are considering alternatives. Rashmud Jalop, chairman of the Defense Committee of the Danish Parliament, I recently posted on social media that one of the people who decided to buy F-35 of Denmark. I'm sorry to have to do that. Denmark is increasing its defense spending. After Mr. Trump said that Greenland needs better protection and claims, we'll take the island one way or another. Zalot called for avoiding buying US weapons if possible. I can imagine a situation where the United States wants Greenland to take from Denmark and threatened to turn off our weapons if we refuse. Buying American weapons is a security risk that we can't accept. When Trump was elected to a second term, Europe has anticipated growing pressure from the US on increasing defense spending. They think that the purchase of American weapons may meet that requirement in part and bring Mr. Trump the trade victories you want. But changes in policy, your relations with Russia, it makes some people think again. Concerns rise as Trump suspends military aid and sharing information for Ukraine after a heated argument with the president, Volodymyr Zelensky. In the Oval Office at the end of February, an anonymous EU diplomat said that this bloc should be open, new defense spending initiative for American companies, at least in part if necessary. EU diplomat says no matter what people say, we are still very dependent on America. At least in the next 15 years, we are still dependent on the American presence in Europe, whether it's alertness or their strategic transport flights. While Europe, there are alternatives to equipment like fighter jets. Their defense industry is fragmented across 6 locations and is not comparable to the giant American industry. Building critical capabilities can take years. However, officials and analysts say
There's a couple of reasons to predict that Europe will not leave soon. Dependence on American weapons. In an article titled, "The Trump Administration Accidentally Texted Me About Their War Plans," it was published in The Atlantic on March 24. Jeffrey Goldberg, editor-in-chief of this magazine, revealed that he knew the attack was aimed at. Maybe it's about to happen. 2 hours before the first bombs went off. According to this American journalist was accidentally added to a conversation in which officials, high level in the president's administration, Donald Trump discusses the conduct of airstrikes targeting Iranian-backed paramilitary forces in Yemen in the middle of this month. Gilbert said he's been asked to connect on the messaging service encrypted signals from the White House National Security Advisor Michael Waltz on March 11th, and was invited to join a small group for the PC exam 2 days later, according to The Atlantic. This group includes U.S. Vice President Jerry Vance, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, and Director of National Intelligence Toshi Gavak, and some others. Spokesperson for the White House National Security Council, Brian Hill, spoke to ABC News about the statement that he gave to The Atlantic, confirmed the authenticity of the group conversation on the signal. Mr. Hill said, "Chain, this message is evidence of policy coordination, deep and thoughtful among senior officials. Continuous success of the action to the exam that there is no threat to our military or our national security." Meanwhile, Defense Minister Hegseth has denied journalist Gilbert's description about group chats. Mr. Hegseth accused Mr. Gilbert of being a liar and lose credibility, a self-proclaimed journalist who specialized in publishing over and over again. President Donald Trump also said he knew nothing about the incident, and then added that, "This is the first time I've heard from a journalist." Asked questions about the case, Trump later mocked the story. Repost on the Twitter platform, a post by mentor Elon Musk on social network X. "It's the best place to hide a dead body. It's page 2 of The Atlantic magazine, because no one's ever been there." While the truth is shocking, of senior officials in the US government accidentally putting a journalist in a group related to war plans, there's been a lot of debate inside the White House that your national security Michael Waltz could be forced off duty. No decision has been made yet, and White House officials say that President Trump will make a final decision or next 2 days. A senior official in the administration responded to US officials are currently in discussions what to do with Michael Waltz. According to this currently about 50% of the opinion given that they don't deserve to continue the senior work. White House officials raised the idea that you should resign to avoid being put in a bad position by the president. But another official said, US President Donald Trump has spoken to one, and the White House is supporting him. White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt said, as President Trump said, "The attacks on most successful and highly effective. The president continues to have absolute confidence in national security, including National Security Advisor Michael Waltz," a fourth White House official said. "They know about internal pressure. Waltz have to admit their mistakes. This may mean that Mr. Waltz, you may have to resign." Many people said, even though President Trump can blame her for the ones, because what you do is potentially dangerous. American national security. But the president can also feel 7. With Vice President Vance, this latest incident is clearly an opportunity for those who criticize doubts about his neoconservative relationship to promote his removal. Those concerns were by a conservative, isolationist amplification on the social media. After the incident, however, many Republicans still want him Waltz through this unfortunate incident. House Speaker Michael Johnson confirmed National Security Advisor should not resign at all. Recently, an American journalist was accidentally included in a group in which officials key in the presidential administration Donald Trump discusses top-secret military plan to attack Houthi armed groups in Yemen. Specifically, according to CNN, Jeffrey Goldberg, editor-in-chief of The Atlantic magazine, surprise added to group top officials of the U.S. government. Several other officials were also present, including consultant Stephen Miller, Susan's chief of staff, Gillespie, and special envoy Stephen Witkoff. Roberts said he was featured in a conversation on the channel called Small Group PC Hoti, and realized that 18 members of the group are people from President Trump's cabinet. Singapore is a commercial chat app. It is not allowed by the US government to share sensitive information. On The Atlantic, Editor-in-Chief Goldberg said he was remove sensitive information including the identity of a senior CIA officer and current activity information. National Security Council spokesman Brian Hookcrest. The White House confirmed the leak. This spokesperson said, "This appears to be a sequence of authenticated messages. Some phone number accidentally added. This series of messages as evidence of policy coordination, deep and thoughtful among senior officials. The continued success of the campaign targeting there is no threat to the military or security. National security." The same day, US President Donald Trump said, "You don't know about this leak. And I'm not a fan of The Atlantic magazine." White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt later stressed, "President, I have full confidence in my national security including team." National Security Advisor Mike Pence. In a related development in the middle of the U.S. military's Central Command CENTCOM said, the U.S. military has launched a massive operation Iran-backed in Yemen. Specific CENTCOM said has developed a wide range of activities including precision aimed at the targets of Houthi Iranian-backed forces across Yemen, to protect American interests, to deter the enemy, and restore freedom of navigation. With CENTCOM's announcements at the time, share on Truth Social, President Donald Trump said, the U.S. has launched a large-scale military operation in Yemen. He said, this effort included airstrikes on the Houthis' leader and missile defense system, to restore freedom of navigation in the Canal, Suez, Red Sea and Gulf of Aden.